Marcelo stood on the balcony of his modest yet tastefully designed home, watching the city below him shimmer under a blanket of soft evening lights. The faint sound of car horns and distant chatter echoed from the streets. He held a glass of water in one hand, his other gripping the iron railing, a symbol of the stability he thought he had finally secured. After years of relentless effort and sleepless nights, he had carved out a life he was proud of. His logistics company had just secured a contract with a multinational corporation, one that promised a lucrative stream of revenue that would cement his family's financial future. The air was thick with the scent of celebration. Inside, his wife Fernanda was setting the dinner table, humming softly, while their young son, Gabriel, worked on his school project in the corner of the living room. Marcelo turned back toward them and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had promised himself that this would be the best Christmas they had ever had. Money would no longer be the lurking specter in the background of every conversation. His finances were in order, or so he believed, and for the first time in years, he felt light, unburdened. As he sat down to join his family, his phone buzzed with a notification. The sender's name made his stomach tighten. Enrique. His business partner rarely contacted him after hours. The subject of the email was cryptic. Urgent. Need to discuss immediately. Marcelo excused himself from the table with a reassuring smile and stepped into his office, a small space lined with shelves of neatly organized books on management, strategy, and finance. He opened the email and began reading. The more he read, the colder his body became. Enrique had vanished, the email revealed. Along with him, so had millions of dollars tied to the new contract. Marcelo scanned the email twice, 3 times, hoping to find some reassurance that it was all a misunderstanding. Instead, every word carved another wound. The company's accounts were drained, leaving Marcelo not only penniless, but also with debts that could destroy his reputation and life. He sank into his chair, the weight of the revelation suffocating. A hollow ache spread through his chest as questions began swirling. How could Enrique do this? Had there been signs he had missed, blinded by the excitement of their success? His thoughts raced to the people who depended on him, the employees, his family, the investors he had convinced with promises of security and growth. The muffled laughter of Gabriel from the other room pulled Marcelo back to the present. He walked out, his face pale but composed, and sat back at the table. Fernanda's expression shifted immediately. She knew him too well. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly, her voice edged with concern. Marcelo hesitated, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It's Enrique," he began, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Something's happened." As he explained the situation in fragments, Fernanda's eyes widened, and she clasped her hands together tightly. He noticed a flicker of guilt cross her face, and before he could ask, she admitted something that made his stomach twist further. She had overheard a vague conversation weeks ago, Enrique speaking nervously about the deal, but she had brushed it off, not wanting to stress Marcelo unnecessarily. It was a decision she now deeply regretted. A wave of anger surged through Marcelo, but it was quickly replaced by despair. He couldn't afford to waste energy blaming anyone, not now. His family's stability, his business, everything they had built together was hanging by a thread. He stood abruptly, pacing the room. Fernanda reached for his hand, but he pulled away, his mind already calculating his next steps. He would need to meet with the company's lawyers first thing in the morning. Perhaps there was a way to freeze the accounts, to salvage what was left. Yet deep down, he felt the crushing reality. Enrique had been meticulous. Marcelo might already be too late. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house, once a sanctuary, felt unbearably quiet. His thoughts were a storm, images of foreclosure, bankruptcy, and his son growing up in an unstable home, flashing through his mind. He couldn't bear the idea of losing everything. He couldn't bear the shame of facing the world as a failure. For a moment, Marcelo considered calling an old friend who had made his fortune in speculative investments, hoping for advice or perhaps a loan to buy himself time. But the thought of begging for help made him nauseous. His pride had always been his armor, and now it felt like a prison. As the first light of dawn crept into the room, Marcelo sat up, his resolve hardening. If his life had taught him anything, it was that desperation could be transformed into determination. He didn't know how he would fix this, but he knew he would. He had to, for his son, for Fernanda, for the man he used to be. If you've ever faced a moment where your world seemed to collapse overnight, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's explore this journey together. The morning sun cast a pale, indifferent light over the city as Marcelo walked briskly to the bank. His mind was a battlefield of dread and desperate hope, clinging to the slim chance that Henrique's betrayal wasn't as absolute as it seemed. Every step through the bustling streets felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of his collapsing life was anchoring him to the ground. When he reached the bank, the cool sterility of the lobby did little to ease his nerves. The manager, a polished man with an expression of mild concern, gestured for Marcelo to follow him into a private office. As the manager explained the situation in careful, measured tones, Marcelo's worst fears were confirmed. Every account tied to the business had been drained, and the fraudulent transactions were too intricately executed to be accidental. Marcelo tried to remain composed, but his voice cracked as he pressed for answers. How did this happen? Why wasn't there an alert? Something this large. Surely someone should have caught it. The manager offered apologies laced with useless platitudes. Mr. Henrique authorized the transfers. As a co-owner, his actions didn't raise any flags until it was too late. The words sank into Marcelo like stones, each one pulling him deeper into despair. He left the office, his hands trembling, clutching a folder filled with legal jargon that outlined his financial ruin. Outside, the city seemed oblivious to his suffering. Cars honked, pedestrians laughed, and vendors peddled their goods as if nothing had changed. He paused on the corner of the street, watching the world move around him. How could life go on so effortlessly while his was falling apart? His thoughts circled back to Gabriel and Fernanda. He had always promised them stability, a life free of the struggles he had faced growing up. Now, even that promise had been ripped away. Desperation led him to seek out a lawyer, someone who could offer a lifeline in the storm. Marcelo's regular attorney, however, was unavailable, and he found himself sitting in a small, dimly lit office with a junior associate who lacked the authority or the confidence to provide solutions. Your situation is complex, the young lawyer stammered, flipping through the documents Marcelo had brought. Recovering any funds will be an uphill battle. Cases like this can take years, and even then, the odds aren't in your favor. Marcelo's patience, already frayed, snapped. So you're saying there's nothing I can do? I'm supposed to sit back and watch my life disintegrate? The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. There are options, but they'll require time and resources, both of which you're short on. Perhaps focusing on damage control would be a better approach for now. Damage control. The phrase echoed in Marcelo's mind as he walked out of the office. How could he control damage that had already destroyed everything? He felt the sting of humiliation as he realized he would have to confront his employees, people who had trusted him, relied on him. The thought of their disappointment was almost unbearable. That evening, Marcelo sat at the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. Fernanda approached cautiously, her voice soft but steady. "You can't face this alone," she said. "Let me help. Let us help." Her words were well-intentioned, but Marcelo recoiled. "What can you do? What can anyone do? This isn't just about the money, it's everything. My name, my reputation. Gone." Fernanda knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. We've built our life together. It's not gone, Marcelo. We're still here. Gabrielle is still here. We'll find a way through this. Her insistence brought a flicker of warmth to his otherwise cold resolve. But Marcelo's pride wouldn't let him lean on her, not fully. He felt a gnawing sense of failure as a provider, a protector. How could he ask her to carry a burden that wasn't hers to bear? In the days that followed, Marcelo began taking small, reluctant steps to keep their household afloat. He sold his car, a symbol of his hard-earned success, and took on odd jobs through a friend's company. The work was grueling, menial, and far beneath the station he had once prided himself on, but it put food on the table. It was during one of these jobs, moving heavy boxes into the back of a truck, that Marcelo met Miguel. The older man exuded an air of quiet authority, his sharp eyes observing Marcelo with a mix of curiosity and understanding. "You're not meant for this kind of work," Miguel said, his voice calm but firm. Marcelo straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "What makes you think that?" Miguel shrugged, his expression inscrutable. "You carry yourself differently. Like someone who's used to having the world at his feet. Now it looks like the world's kicked you in the teeth." The bluntness of the statement startled Marcelo, but he couldn't deny the truth in it. "Life has a way of humbling people," he replied, his tone guarded. Miguel studied him for a moment before offering a faint smile. "Humbling, yes. Destroying? That's up to you." The cryptic remark lingered in Marcelo's mind long after Miguel had walked away. Something about the man's presence unsettled him, yet it also sparked a faint glimmer of curiosity. Who was Miguel? And why did it feel like he had seen through Marcelo's carefully constructed facade of determination? As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcelo found himself back on his balcony, staring at the city lights once more. But this time, the view felt different. The glittering skyline no longer represented hope or achievement. It was a stark reminder of what he had lost. Still, Miguel's words played on a loop in his mind. Destroying. That's up to you. The weight of his situation remained, but a seed of something unfamiliar began to take root, the possibility of resilience. Marcelo woke before dawn, his body stiff from the unfamiliar labor of the past few days. The once familiar rhythm of his mornings, checking emails, reviewing contracts, and planning the growth of his company, was now replaced by the harsh reality of survival. Instead of the hum of a prosperous life, his mind was filled with the noise of doubt, guilt, and frustration. Yet as he prepared for another day of temporary work, Miguel's words lingered in his thoughts. By mid-morning, Marcelo found himself unloading crates at a small distribution center on the outskirts of the city. The work was physically taxing, a far cry from the life of meetings and polished presentations he had left behind. Each lift and each step seemed to erode another layer of pride he had clung to for years. During a short break, he sat on an overturned crate, sweat dripping from his brow. Across the yard, Miguel appeared, his presence as unassuming as it was commanding. He approached with a casual stride, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like a man who could use this," Miguel said, handing Marcelo a cup. Marcelo hesitated, but took it, muttering a quiet thanks. The warmth of the drink contrasted with the cold weight in his chest. Miguel sat beside him, silent for a moment before speaking. "You know, people think money solves everything, and it does, until it doesn't." Marcelo glanced at him, unsure how to respond. "That's easy to say when you have it," he replied bitterly. Miguel chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I've had it, and I've lost it, more than once. What I learned is that money isn't the problem. It's what we think it represents. Security, power, validation. But when it's gone, what's left?" Marcelo stared into his coffee, his thoughts churning. Miguel's words felt too close to the truth he had been avoiding. Without his business, without his finances in order, Marcelo felt like nothing more than a shadow of the man he once was. "What's left?" Marcelo finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Miguel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back, gazing at the horizon. "That's what you have to figure out." The conversation gnawed at Marcelo for the rest of the day. Miguel's calm demeanor and cryptic advice unsettled him, yet it also stirred something long dormant within him, a faint, flickering sense of hope. That evening, Marcelo walked through the streets of his neighborhood, his thoughts a tangled web of past decisions and uncertain futures. His feet carried him to a small, run-down cafe he hadn't noticed before. Inside, the hum of conversation and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted him like a fragile solace. Behind the counter stood Marta, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Marcelo ordered a coffee and sat at a corner table, his mind too restless to settle. It wasn't long before Marta approached, her curiosity evident. "You don't look like the usual crowd we get here," she remarked, setting down a refill without being asked. Marcelo offered a faint smile. "I guess I don't feel like myself these days." Marta sat across from him, uninvited but somehow welcome. "Let me guess," she said, studying him. "You used to have it all, now not so much." The bluntness of her words caught Marcelo off guard, but he nodded. "Something like that." Marta leaned back, crossing her arms. "I've seen it before. You know, this cafe? It was all I had left after my husband passed and left me with a mountain of debt. I thought I'd never dig my way out, but here I am." Marcelo's curiosity piqued. "How did you do it?" "Day by day," she said simply, "and by letting go of the idea that I had to be who I was before." Her words hit Marcelo like a quiet revelation. He had been clinging to the identity of a successful businessman, terrified of what it meant to lose that image. But sitting across from Marta, he began to see a different kind of strength, the kind forged through resilience and humility. Over the next few days, Marcelo returned to the cafe during his breaks. Marta's candid advice and Miguel's enigmatic guidance began to weave together in his mind, forming a fragile framework for rebuilding his life. Yet the road ahead remained steep, and Marcelo couldn't shake the gnawing desire to confront Enrique and demand justice. Late one evening, Marcelo sat in the dim glow of his small office at home, poring over old documents and emails. His hands trembled as he uncovered a trail of subtle inconsistencies in Enrique's communications over the past year. Details he had overlooked in his eagerness to grow the business. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. Marcelo had been so focused on success that he had ignored the red flags, trusting Enrique implicitly. Now, that trust felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. Despite the anger simmering within him, Marcelo knew he couldn't act impulsively. He needed a plan, a way to expose Enrique without further damaging his own precarious situation. As he sat back, exhausted yet restless, the faint sound of Gabriel's laughter drifted from the living room. Marcelo's heart ached with a mix of love and guilt. He had been so consumed by his downfall that he had barely spent time with his son in recent weeks. Standing in the doorway, Marcelo watched Gabriel play with a set of worn-out toy cars. The simplicity of the scene brought tears to his eyes. For all his financial worries and shattered pride, this was what mattered most. But as much as he wanted to focus solely on his family, Marcelo knew he couldn't ignore the shadow Enrique had cast over his life. Somewhere in the chaos of betrayal and loss, Marcelo felt the faint stirrings of a purpose he hadn't yet defined. Marcelo sat in the worn leather chair of his modest home office, his fingers drumming restlessly against the armrest. Spread across the desk in front of him were stacks of old emails, financial records, and company contracts. Each document felt like a breadcrumb, leading him closer to the truth about Enrique. Yet the path was tangled and elusive. His mind raced as he tried to piece together a narrative, but every answer seemed to create more questions. The betrayal gnawed at him, not just for the financial ruin it caused, but for the blind trust he had placed in someone he considered a friend. Marcelo had built his company from the ground up, and Enrique had been by his side through the struggles, or so he thought. It was late when Marcelo received a call from a former colleague who had heard rumors about Enrique's whereabouts. The name of a luxury hotel in the heart of the city slipped through the line like a whispered secret. Marcelo's pulse quickened. If Enrique was hiding in plain sight, mingling with the city's elite, it only fueled Marcelo's desire for confrontation. The next evening, he found himself at the entrance of the opulent hotel. The marble floors gleamed under golden chandeliers, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and ambition. Marcelo adjusted the borrowed suit he had hastily pressed, his discomfort hidden beneath a mask of determination. As he wandered through the grand lobby, he felt painfully out of place. The crowd was a blur of tailored suits and sparkling jewelry, their conversations laced with casual mentions of investments, deals, and profits. Marcelo caught fragments of their words, each one a reminder of the world he had been cast out of. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne flutes, and Marcelo grabbed one, more for something to do with his hands than any desire to drink. He scanned the room, his eyes darting from face to face, searching for Enrique. But instead of finding his former partner, he locked eyes with Miguel, who was standing by the bar, observing him with a calm, knowing expression. "What are you doing here?" Marcelo asked, his voice low and tense as he approached. Miguel raised an eyebrow. "The better question is, what are you doing here?" "I got a tip," Marcelo replied, his words clipped. "Enrique might be here." Miguel nodded slowly, taking a sip of his drink. "And what's your plan if you find him? Publicly accuse him in front of all these people? Cause a scene?" Marcelo bristled at Miguel's tone. "I need answers. I need to understand why he did this." "And then what?" Miguel's gaze was steady, almost disarming. "Do you think that knowing why will bring your money back, fix your finances? Or will it just give you a moment of satisfaction before you realize you're still standing in the same wreckage?" The words stung, but Marcelo couldn't deny their truth. He had no plan beyond the confrontation, no strategy for what came after. Before he could respond, Miguel gestured subtly toward a group near the far corner of the room. Marcelo followed his gaze and felt his breath catch. Enrique was there, laughing with a group of men in sharp suits, a glass of scotch in hand. The sight of him so carefree, as if nothing had happened, made Marcelo's blood boil. Miguel placed a firm hand on Marcelo's shoulder. "Not here," he said quietly. "This isn't the place." Marcelo clenched his fists, every muscle in his body screaming for action. But Miguel's steady presence was an anchor, pulling him back from the edge. "Then where?" Marcelo asked through gritted teeth. Miguel's eyes flickered with something Marcelo couldn't quite place. Sympathy, perhaps, or a calculated wisdom. "You'll know when the time is right." The enigmatic response only added to Marcelo's frustration, but before he could argue, Miguel had disappeared into the crowd. Marcelo lingered for a moment longer, his eyes fixed on Enrique before reluctantly turning and walking away. The streets outside the hotel were a stark contrast to the gilded opulence within. Marcelo's footsteps echoed against the cold pavement as he replayed the evening in his mind. Miguel's words haunted him, and for the first time he questioned whether his pursuit of Enrique was about justice or revenge. The next day, Marcelo returned to Marta's cafe, his thoughts heavy as he sipped his coffee. Marta noticed his somber expression and sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her own mug. "You've got that look," she said, her voice laced with a mix of curiosity and concern. Marcelo glanced up, surprised by her perceptiveness. "What look?" "The one that says you're about to do something stupid." Marcelo let out a humorless laugh. "I saw him. Henrique. He was at the hotel last night." Marta's eyes widened slightly. "Did you confront him?" "No," Marcelo admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "Miguel stopped me, said it wasn't the right time." Marta nodded thoughtfully. "He's not wrong. If you're going after someone like Enrique, you need to be smart about it. People like that, they're used to getting away with things. You can't just charge in and expect them to crumble." Her words mirrored Miguel's, and Marcelo felt the weight of their combined wisdom. As much as he wanted to act, he knew he needed a plan, a way to expose Henrique's deceit without making himself more vulnerable. The conversation with Marta left Marcelo with a renewed sense of purpose. He spent the next few days digging deeper into his company's records, finding patterns and connections he hadn't noticed before. It was slow, painstaking work, but with each discovery, he felt a spark of hope reignite. Still, Marcelo couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Enrique's life of luxury continued unchecked, while Marcelo struggled to rebuild even the smallest pieces of his own. And through it all, Miguel's cryptic advice lingered in the back of his mind, a reminder that patience could be just as powerful as action. The days grew colder as December crept closer, and Marcelo felt the weight of his circumstances press harder against his shoulders. Every moment seemed to stretch endlessly, his life reduced to a monotonous routine of menial work and sleepless nights spent hunting for evidence against Henrique. Yet, amidst the chaos, small moments of clarity emerged. Moments that reminded him why he was fighting so hard. One evening, Marcelo returned to Marta's cafe, his nerves frayed from the relentless grind. As he pushed through the door, the warmth of the space enveloped him, a stark contrast to the icy wind outside. Marta greeted him with her usual no-nonsense tone, sliding a mug of coffee across the counter before he could ask. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, taking a seat across from him. Marcelo chuckled, though it came out more as a sigh. "I feel like it." Marta leaned forward, her expression softening. "You've been burning the candle at both ends, haven't you? Chasing ghosts won't bring you peace, Marcelo." He took a sip of the coffee, the bitterness grounding him. "It's not just about peace. It's about justice. He destroyed everything I built. I can't let him get away with it." Marta's gaze was steady, her voice calm but firm. "And what happens if you do bring him down? Do you think it'll fix everything? Will it rebuild your finances, your business, your life?" Marcelo didn't answer immediately. The truth was, he didn't know. The pursuit of Henrique had become an obsession, a way to channel his anger and frustration. But Marta's words struck a chord. What was he really fighting for? The next morning, Marcelo met Miguel at the edge of the city, where Miguel had invited him to help with a charity project. The event was held at a community center, a place filled with families struggling to make ends meet. Marcelo hesitated at first, unsure what role he could play amidst so many people in need. But Miguel's unwavering demeanor left little room for refusal. "Come on," Miguel said, handing Marcelo a box filled with supplies. "Sometimes the best way to solve your own problems is to help someone else with theirs." As the day unfolded, Marcelo found himself drawn into the stories of the people he met. Parents who had lost their jobs, children who faced the world with resilience far beyond their years, and volunteers who gave what little they had to make life easier for others. It was humbling, even healing, in a way Marcelo hadn't expected. At one point, he found himself speaking with a man named Davi, a former factory worker who had lost his job after an injury. Davi spoke openly about his struggles, but there was no bitterness in his voice, only determination to create a better life for his family. "I used to think money was everything," Davy said, his tone reflective. "But when I lost it all, I realized the only thing I really needed was the people around me. Money comes and goes, but if you lose your family, you lose everything." The words lingered in Marcelo's mind long after he left the center. That evening, he sat on the floor of his living room with Gabriel, helping him assemble a puzzle they had found in a forgotten corner of the house. The simple act of spending time with his son felt like a lifeline, a reminder of the things that truly mattered. Yet, even as he embraced these moments of connection, Marcelo's desire for justice remained undiminished. Late at night, after Fernanda and Gabriel had gone to bed, he returned to his desk, poring over the fragments of evidence he had gathered. It was during one of these late-night sessions that he uncovered something unexpected: a series of cryptic transactions tied to a shell company Enrique had set up months before the betrayal. Marcelo's heart raced as he traced the money trail, realizing it led back to a powerful group of investors known for their ruthless business practices. The discovery filled him with a mix of dread and determination. Enrique hadn't acted alone. He was part of something much larger. Marcelo knew he couldn't take on such forces by himself, but the thought of walking away was unbearable. The next day, he met with Miguel at their usual spot in the park. Marcelo shared what he had found, his voice a mix of excitement and fear. "So, what do you think?" Marcelo asked. "Do I have a chance?" Miguel studied him for a long moment before responding. "That depends on what you're willing to risk. Taking on people like this, it's not just about the money anymore, it's about power, and they don't let go easily." Marcelo nodded, his resolve unwavering. "I don't care how powerful they are. I won't stop until I get justice." Miguel's expression softened, a faint hint of respect in his eyes. "Just remember, justice and revenge aren't the same thing. Make sure you know which one you're really after." As Marcelo walked away from the park, Miguel's words echoed in his mind. He couldn't deny the truth in them, but he also couldn't shake the image of Enrique laughing amidst the luxury of his new life. The anger burned within him, a fire he couldn't extinguish. Yet, for the first time, Marcelo began to realize that his journey wasn't just about Enrique. It was about reclaiming the parts of himself that had been lost along the way, the parts that couldn't be measured in money or success. The city was cloaked in the sharp chill of December, its streets illuminated by twinkling lights and decorated storefronts. But Marcelo felt no warmth from the season's festivities as he sat in his dimly lit living room, staring at a folder of evidence spread across the coffee table. The faint sound of Gabriel playing in his room drifted through the walls, a bittersweet reminder of what he was fighting for. Yet, Marcelo couldn't escape the weight of doubt pressing on him. The transactions he had uncovered tied Enrique to a dangerous web of deceit. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and connections to powerful players painted a picture far more complex than Marcelo had anticipated. Each thread he pulled revealed another layer of corruption, making it clear that Enrique wasn't the mastermind. He was just a cog in a larger machine. Fernanda entered the room, her face etched with concern as she watched Marcelo comb through his notes for the 100th time. She had stayed patient, offering support when she could, but her frustration was beginning to show. "You've been at this for weeks," she said gently. "I know you're trying to fix things, but at what cost? You're barely present anymore. Gabriel misses you." Marcelo sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I miss him too. I miss us. But if I don't keep pushing, we'll lose everything. I can't let Enrique walk away unscathed." Fernanda knelt beside him, placing a hand on his knee. "Marcelo, we've already lost so much. Don't let this obsession take what little we have left. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do." Her words struck a nerve, but Marcelo couldn't bring himself to agree. How could he walk away when the man who betrayed him was thriving, untouched by the chaos he had left behind? Yet, as Fernanda left the room, her footsteps soft and resigned, Marcelo couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at his heart. The next day, Marcelo met Miguel at their usual spot by the park fountain. The older man had become an unexpected source of wisdom, though his cryptic nature often left Marcelo more frustrated than enlightened. "I found more," Marcelo said, his voice edged with a mix of triumph and anxiety. "Enrique isn't working alone. There's a group behind him. Powerful people. If I can expose them, maybe I can stop this for good." Miguel raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "And what happens when you poke a nest of vipers? You might expose them, sure, but you might also get bitten." "I don't care," Marcelo snapped. "They've already taken everything from me. What else do I have to lose?" Miguel leaned back on the bench, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "That's the question you need to ask yourself. What are you willing to sacrifice for this? Your safety, your family? Sometimes the cost of justice is too high." Marcelo's frustration boiled over. "Then what do you suggest I do? Just let them get away with it? Live the rest of my life knowing they won?" Miguel turned to him, his eyes sharp. "Winning and losing aren't always what they seem. If you destroy yourself in the process, who really wins?" The conversation left Marcelo more conflicted than ever. He couldn't ignore the risks, but he also couldn't let go of the need for retribution. The thought of Enrique and his accomplices continuing their lives untouched was unbearable. Later that evening, Marcelo returned to Marta's cafe. The warmth of the space had become a refuge, a place where he could think clearly amidst the chaos. Marta noticed his troubled expression and brought over 2 steaming cups of coffee without a word. "You've got that stormy look again," she said, sitting across from him. "What's going on now?" Marcelo hesitated before sharing his discovery about the larger conspiracy. Marta listened intently, her expression unreadable as he laid out his findings. When he finished, she leaned back, her arms crossed. "You've got the pieces, but what's your plan? Running at them head-on isn't going to work. These people don't play fair." "I know," Marcelo admitted. "That's why I need help." Marta's gaze sharpened. "And you think I can help?" "I run a cafe, Marcelo. I don't have the kind of power you're up against." "Not power," Marcelo said quickly. "But you've been through this kind of thing before. You know how to survive when the odds are against you." Marta studied him for a moment before sighing. "All right, but if we're doing this, you need to be smart. No impulsive moves, no heroics. We do this the right way, or not at all." Marcelo nodded, a faint sense of relief washing over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he wasn't completely alone in his fight. Over the next few days, Marta and Marcelo worked together to refine their strategy. With Miguel's occasional input, they began piecing together a plan to gather concrete evidence that could hold up against Enrique and his allies. Yet, as their preparations progressed, Marcelo couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a tightrope, one wrong step away from disaster. One evening, as he stood on the balcony of his home, the city lights stretching out before him, Marcelo felt the weight of his choices pressing against his chest. He had come too far to turn back, yet the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. In the distance, the faint sound of Christmas carolers drifted through the air, a bittersweet reminder of the season. Marcelo closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He didn't know what the future held, but he was determined to face it head-on, no matter the cost. Marcelo found himself in a dimly lit banquet hall, the hum of low conversation filling the air. The atmosphere was opulent, the kind that whispered exclusivity at every corner. Chandeliers cast a soft golden glow over the room, reflecting off polished silverware and crystal glasses. He adjusted his tie, a borrowed accessory, and scanned the crowd. His chest tightened as he realized how far removed he was from these people. They exuded confidence, their laughter light and effortless, while Marcelo felt like an intruder in a life he no longer recognized. Beside him, Marta adjusted the strap of her modest black dress, her sharp eyes darting across the room. "This is where the wolves gather," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the hum of conversations. "Keep your head low until you know what you're dealing with." Marcelo nodded, but couldn't keep his gaze from wandering, searching for Henrique. The name alone was a storm in his chest, stirring anger, betrayal, and a relentless desire for answers. Henrique was here. Marcelo had confirmed it through a contact Miguel had introduced him to. Yet now that he was so close, doubt crept in. Would confronting him here accomplish anything, or would it only make Marcelo more vulnerable? Marta's elbow nudged him. "Focus," she said, her tone firm. "Remember why you're here. This isn't about a scene, it's about gathering proof." Marcelo nodded again, her words grounding him. The plan was simple. Observe, listen, and confirm Enrique's ties to the group of shadowy investors who had enabled his betrayal. But simplicity didn't equate to ease. Every moment in this space felt like walking a razor's edge. As the evening wore on, Marcelo's patience was rewarded. Across the room, he spotted Enrique leaning against the bar, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. His laughter rang out, a jarring contrast to the chaos he had left in Marcelo's life. Marcelo's jaw tightened as he watched Enrique engage with a group of men, their conversation too distant to hear. Marta placed a firm hand on his arm. "Don't, not yet." Her words were a lifeline, pulling Marcelo back from the edge of impulsive action. Instead, he observed, noting the subtle dynamics between Enrique and the men he spoke to. One of them, a tall man with a sharp, angular face, seemed to command respect, his gestures measured and deliberate. Marcelo's instincts told him this man was more than a casual acquaintance. The evening dragged on, each passing moment testing Marcelo's restraint. He exchanged polite smiles with strangers, feigned interest in their superficial chatter, all while keeping Enrique in his peripheral vision. Marta, ever vigilant, navigated the crowd with the ease of someone who had spent years learning how to blend in. It wasn't until late in the evening that Marcelo saw an opening. Enrique had stepped out onto the terrace, alone, his glass nearly empty. Marcelo followed, his pulse quickening with every step. The terrace was quiet, the cool night air a stark contrast to the warmth inside. Enrique leaned against the railing, gazing out at the city lights with an air of casual indifference. Marcelo hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, his footsteps deliberate. Enrique turned, his expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. "Marcelo," he said, his voice smooth but tinged with feigned warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here." Marcelo fought to keep his anger in check. "I'm sure you didn't. You've been busy, haven't you?" Enrique's smile was thin, calculated. "If you've come to discuss old grievances, this isn't the place." Marcelo stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "This isn't about grievances, Enrique. This is about the truth. I know you didn't do this alone." Enrique's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but it was enough to confirm Marcelo's suspicions. "You always did have a knack for dramatics," Enrique said, his tone dismissive. "But I suggest you tread carefully. This isn't a game you want to play." The warning only fueled Marcelo's resolve. "It's not a game. It's my life, the one you destroyed." Before Enrique could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made both men turn. The angular-faced man Marcelo had noticed earlier stepped onto the terrace, his presence immediately commanding. His sharp eyes flicked between Marcelo and Enrique, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Everything all right here?" the man asked, his tone polite but laced with an undercurrent of authority. Enrique's demeanor shifted instantly, his confidence waning under the man's scrutiny. "Just catching up with an old friend," Enrique said smoothly, though his unease was palpable. The man studied Marcelo for a moment, his gaze piercing. "A pleasure to meet you," he said finally, extending a hand. "I'm Victor." Marcelo hesitated before shaking his hand, the gesture feeling more like a test than a greeting. "Marcelo," he replied, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. Victor's smile widened slightly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I've heard your name before. A shame about what happened with your company, but I'm sure a resourceful man like you will find a way to bounce back." The words were polite, but their undertone was chilling. Marcelo felt as though he was being sized up, his every move scrutinized. He nodded curtly, unwilling to give anything away. As Victor turned his attention to Henrique, Marcelo stepped back, sensing that his presence was no longer welcome. But as he retreated to the shadows of the terrace, he couldn't shake the feeling that Victor's interest in him wasn't accidental. When Marcelo rejoined Marta inside, his mind was racing. "Did you see him?" he asked quietly. "I saw," Marta replied, her expression grim. "That's not someone you want to cross without a solid plan. He's dangerous." Marcelo nodded, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. Victor wasn't just a part of Henrique's scheme, he was at the center of it. And confronting him would be a far greater challenge than Marcelo had anticipated. But as they left the banquet hall and stepped into the cold night, Marcelo felt a flicker of clarity. This wasn't just about Henrique anymore. The fight ahead was larger than he had imagined, but he couldn't turn back now. The chill of the December night had settled into Marcelo's bones by the time he reached home. The encounter on the terrace lingered in his mind, replaying in fragments. The tension in Henrique's voice, the measured words of Victor, the way both men had seemed unfazed by Marcelo's presence, as if they had already calculated his insignificance in their grander scheme. Yet Marcelo's gut told him differently. The fleeting falter in Henrique's confidence, the subtle shift in Victor's expression when Marcelo introduced himself. Those cracks, though small, hinted at something more vulnerable beneath their polished exteriors. The next morning, Marcelo couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As he stepped out to run a quick errand, he noticed a black sedan idling near the cafe where he often met Marta. The tinted windows revealed nothing, but the driver's posture, rigid and alert, set Marcelo's nerves on edge. He quickened his pace, turning down an alley and slipping through a side entrance into the cafe. Marta was already there, her face buried in the morning's newspaper. She glanced up as Marcelo slid into the seat across from her. "You're late," she said, folding the paper neatly. "Something wrong?" Marcelo hesitated, glancing out the window before lowering his voice. "I think they're watching me." Marta didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in, her tone calm but firm. "Of course they are. You've stirred the pot. People like Victor don't take kindly to uninvited guests poking around their business." Marcelo exhaled sharply, frustration bubbling to the surface. "What am I supposed to do? Stop? Pretend everything's fine while they get away with it?" Marta's gaze softened, though her voice remained steady. "No, but you need to be smarter. They have power, Marcelo. Money, influence, resources you can't match. If you're going to take them on, you need something they don't see coming." Marcelo leaned back, his mind racing. The discovery of Victor's involvement had shifted the stakes dramatically. Henrique's betrayal was personal, but Victor's presence turned this into something far more dangerous. Marcelo needed to be strategic, methodical, traits he had once prided himself on, but now felt distant in the chaos of his circumstances. Later that day, Marcelo met with Miguel at a quiet park on the outskirts of the city. The older man listened intently as Marcelo recounted the events of the banquet and his growing suspicions about Victor. Miguel's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "You've uncovered something big," Miguel said finally. "Bigger than you realize. Victor isn't just another businessman, he's a kingmaker. The kind of man who can destroy lives with a single phone call." Marcelo's stomach churned, but he kept his voice steady. "Then how do I fight him?" Miguel's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. By not fighting him the way he expects, people like Victor don't see individuals as threats. They see systems, money, and influence. If you can show them that you're not afraid, that you have nothing left to lose, it unsettles them. But you'll need proof, something concrete to back your claims. The advice gave Marcelo a sliver of direction. That evening, he returned to his desk, poring over every document, every email, every shred of evidence he had collected. He worked late into the night, driven by a mix of desperation and determination. His breakthrough came in the form of an overlooked email thread between Enrique and a consultant hired months before the collapse of Marcelo's business. The emails were vague, but one message stood out, a reference to ensuring the transition is seamless, and an attachment detailing a suspicious offshore account. Marcelo's heart raced as he realized this could be the link between Enrique and Victor. He printed the documents and met with Marta and Miguel the next day to share his findings. Marta was impressed, but her cautious nature tempered her excitement. "This is good," she said, studying the documents, "but it's not enough to bring him down. You'll need more names, transactions, something irrefutable." Miguel nodded in agreement. "And you'll need to be careful. If they know you're getting this close, they won't just watch, they'll act." The warning was ominous, but Marcelo couldn't turn back now. Over the next few days, he worked tirelessly, reaching out to old contacts and leveraging every connection he had left to gather more information. The process was slow and risky, but piece by piece, he began to uncover a trail of corruption that stretched far beyond Enrique's betrayal. One evening, as Marcelo walked home from the cafe, he noticed the black sedan again, this time parked across the street from his building. The sight sent a chill down his spine, but he forced himself to walk calmly, his face betraying none of the fear churning inside him. When he entered his apartment, he double-locked the door and sat down at the kitchen table, his thoughts racing. For the first time, the gravity of his actions truly sank in. He was playing a dangerous game against people who had everything to lose and no qualms about silencing those who got in their way. Yet amidst the fear, Marcelo felt a flicker of resolve. He thought of Gabriel, of Fernanda, of the life they had built together, and the values he had always tried to instill in his son. Walking away wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. The faint sound of a car engine starting outside pulled Marcelo back to the present. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds just in time to see the sedan pull away. They were watching, yes, but Marcelo was ready to be seen. The city had grown colder as Christmas drew nearer, but Marcelo barely noticed the weather anymore. His focus was razor-sharp, consumed by the threads of evidence he had painstakingly pieced together. The weight of what he had uncovered pressed heavily on him. Victor's network wasn't just a group of corrupt businessmen. It was an intricate machine, operating in the shadows to control wealth and power far beyond anything Marcelo had imagined. Despite his growing confidence in the case he was building, Marcelo felt the suffocating presence of fear creeping in. The black sedan had become a fixture in his life, always parked a block away or lingering at the edge of his vision. It was a constant reminder that his every move was being monitored. One evening, Marcelo sat at the dining table with Fernanda, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Gabriel played quietly in the other room, his laughter occasionally breaking through the heavy silence. Fernanda set her fork down, her hands trembling slightly. "You need to tell me what's going on," she said, her voice steady but firm. "This obsession, it's changing you. And now Gabriel is asking why you're always so distracted. I don't know how to answer him." Marcelo looked up, guilt tightening in his chest. "I'm doing this for us, Fernanda. For you and Gabriel, to fix what was broken." Fernanda's eyes softened, but her frustration remained. I understand why you're fighting, but what if fighting isn't the answer? What if you're putting us at risk for something you can't win? Marcelo reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. I know it feels impossible, but I have to see this through. If I walk away now, it's not just about losing the money. It's about letting people like Enrique and Victor destroy lives without consequence. Fernanda nodded slowly, though her unease was palpable. Just promise me you'll be careful. Whatever you're planning, don't lose yourself in it. The next day, Marcelo met with Marta and Miguel in the back room of her cafe, their faces illuminated by the glow of a laptop. Marcelo had compiled everything he had gathered: emails, financial records, photos of shell companies, and presented it to them. Marta's brow furrowed as she scrolled through the files, while Miguel leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. This is more than enough to expose Enrique, Marta said finally, her tone measured. But Victor, he's a different beast. This evidence might rattle him, but it won't bring him down. He has too many layers of protection. Marcelo leaned forward, his frustration bubbling to the surface. Then what do we do? I can't stop now, I'm too close. Miguel's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You need leverage, something Victor can't ignore. These men don't fear exposure, they fear losing control. Marcelo nodded, determination hardening his resolve. Then we find something. There has to be a weak spot. Over the next few days, Marcelo and Marta worked tirelessly, digging deeper into Victor's dealings. Late one night, Marcelo stumbled upon a critical piece of information. A subsidiary company owned by Victor's group had been implicated in a major embezzlement case years ago. The case had been buried quickly, but traces of it remained. A witness who had disappeared, a settlement that had been quietly paid under the table. Marcelo brought the discovery to Miguel, who studied it with quiet intensity. This is it, Miguel said, his voice low but certain. If you can link Victor directly to this, it's not just leverage, it's a weapon. But the path forward was fraught with risk. To confirm the connection, Marcelo would need to confront someone within Victor's circle, a move that could either secure his victory or put him in grave danger. That opportunity came sooner than expected. Marcelo received an anonymous message, a single line of text that sent a jolt through him. Meet me at the old warehouse by the docks at midnight. Come alone. Marcelo shared the message with Marta and Miguel, their reactions a mix of concern and skepticism. It's a trap, Marta said bluntly. You walk in there alone and you might not walk out. Miguel, however, looked thoughtful. Maybe. Or maybe it's the break you've been waiting for. Against Marta's protests, Marcelo decided to go. He arrived at the docks just before midnight, the air biting and thick with the smell of salt and oil. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows glinting faintly in the moonlight. Inside, the space was cavernous and silent, the echo of his footsteps magnified against the concrete floor. Marcelo's pulse quickened as a figure emerged from the shadows. A man in his mid-40s, his face gaunt and wary. You're Marcelo, right? The man asked, his voice low and hurried. Marcelo nodded. Who are you? The man glanced over his shoulder nervously before answering. Someone who knows what Victor is capable of. I used to work for him until I saw what he really does. The man handed Marcelo a small flash drive. This has everything you need. Names, accounts, proof of the deals he's made. But you didn't get this from me. If they find out I talked... Marcelo placed a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. I'll protect you. Thank you. Before Marcelo could ask more questions, the man disappeared into the shadows, leaving him alone with the weight of his newfound evidence. As Marcelo walked back to his car, the faint sound of an engine revving in the distance made him pause. His instincts screamed at him to move, and he ducked just in time as a black SUV sped past, narrowly missing him. Marcelo's heart raced as he watched the vehicle disappear into the night. They knew. The stakes had just become life or death. The flash drive was cold in Marcelo's hand as he sat in his small, dimly lit apartment. The weight of its contents felt heavier than anything he had carried before. This was it, the proof that could unravel Victor's empire and finally expose Enrique's betrayal. Yet, as Marcelo stared at the blinking cursor on his laptop, a gnawing fear gripped him. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was a fight against a machine far bigger and more ruthless than he had ever imagined. Gabriel's soft laughter drifted from his bedroom, pulling Marcelo back to the present. He looked at the closed door, then at the flash drive. What if exposing the truth put his family in danger? What if the cost of his crusade was more than he could bear? A knock at the door jolted Marcelo from his thoughts. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding. When he opened it, Marta stood on the other side, her expression a mix of urgency and determination. "You ready?" she asked, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. Marcelo hesitated, then nodded. "I have everything we need. But if we do this..." Marta cut him off. "We've come too far to stop now. You've come too far. This is your fight, Marcelo, but you're not alone in it." Her words steadied him, and together they set the plan in motion. Marcelo sent encrypted copies of the files to a trusted journalist known for taking on powerful figures. The journalist, impressed by the depth of Marcelo's evidence, promised to publish an exposé that would bring Victor's network crashing down. But Victor was one step ahead. That evening, Marcelo received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, Victor's voice was calm, almost amused. "You're braver than I thought," Victor said, "but bravery can be dangerous. Do you really think you can win this game?" Marcelo clenched the phone tightly. "It's not a game to me. It's my life, and I'm not afraid of you." Victor's laughter sent a chill down Marcelo's spine. "Fear isn't the issue. It's what you're willing to lose. Consider this your only warning. Walk away or you'll regret it." The call ended, leaving Marcelo shaken but resolute. He turned to Marta, who had overheard the conversation. "They're scared," she said. "That's why they're threatening you. They know you have something they can't control." As the journalist prepared to go public with the story, Marcelo received another message, this one from Enrique. It was short and cryptic. "Meet me at the church on 5th Avenue. Midnight. Alone." Against Marta's advice, Marcelo went. The church was quiet and dimly lit, its high ceilings echoing with faint creaks. Enrique stood near the altar, his posture tense. "You shouldn't have come," Enrique said, his voice low. Marcelo stepped closer, his anger barely contained. "You destroyed my life, Enrique. You owe me the truth. Why?" Enrique looked away, his jaw tightening. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," Marcelo pressed. After a long silence, Enrique finally spoke. "I didn't have a choice. Victor, he owns everything, everyone. If I didn't play along, he would have ruined me, just like he's trying to ruin you now." Marcelo's voice rose. "And that justifies what you did to me, to my family." "No," Enrique admitted, his voice breaking. "But I was weak, and now you're in his sights. You can't win this, Marcelo. Walk away before it's too late." Marcelo shook his head. "It's already too late. I'm not backing down." Enrique's expression hardened. "Then you're a fool. But I'll give you this. Victor's next move is to discredit you. Be ready." Marcelo left the church with a mix of anger and resolve. Enrique's warning confirmed what he already knew. Victor wouldn't go down without a fight. The next morning, the exposé went live. The story painted a damning picture of Victor's network, implicating Enrique and others in a web of corruption and greed. Marcelo watched the fallout unfold in real time. Headlines, social media outrage, and mounting pressure on law enforcement to act. But Victor struck back swiftly. News outlets began running stories accusing Marcelo of fraud, painting him as a disgruntled businessman seeking revenge. Marcelo's name became a battleground, his reputation hanging by a thread. Marta and Miguel rallied around him, offering their support. "They're trying to scare you," Miguel said, "but the truth is already out there. People will see through their lies." Marcelo nodded, though the weight of the smear campaign was crushing. He turned to Gabriel, who sat nearby, oblivious to the storm swirling around them. Marcelo realized that no matter what happened, he had already won in one way. He had reclaimed his values, his purpose, and his family. In the days that followed, law enforcement launched an investigation into Victor's dealings. Several key players in his network were arrested, including Enrique, who agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. Victor, however, remained elusive, his power shielding him from immediate consequences. On Christmas Eve, Marcelo stood with Fernanda and Gabriel in their small living room. The lights on their modest tree twinkled softly, casting a warm glow. It wasn't the extravagant life he had once envisioned, but it was real. It was enough. As he watched his family laugh and exchange gifts, Marcelo felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The fight wasn't over. Victor was still out there, a looming shadow in the distance. But for now, Marcelo had found something far more valuable than money or success. If you've ever faced a moment where you had to stand your ground against overwhelming odds, share your story in the comments. Let's celebrate resilience together.